Today, we're going to talk about zaddies. I hope I don't regret this. For anyone who's been living under a rock for the last decade, zaddy is a new word, but not so new that it isn't in the dictionary. Google defines it as a sexually attractive man, especially an older one, who's fashionable or charismatic. Dictionary.com defines it as an attractive man who's also stylish, charming, and self-confident, and Merriam-Webster hasn't officially added it yet, but they have a very long blog post that boils down to describing it as, quote, when he's so fine it makes you say, "Zam," which is right, but raises more questions than it answers. I thought the process that gave rise to zaddy was pretty obvious, but it turns out it's not so obvious, and there are a lot of very wrong explanations out there. No, it's not strictly from AAE. No, it's not replacing D with Z for marketing reasons because Z is somehow more pleasant.
So, the Z sound is called a voiced fricative, and it just sounds nice. It's used in the name of pharmaceuticals people want to stand out, or for fast cars, basically to sell stuff. So just think of words like jazz, pizzazz, whiz, zippy, zest, or buzz.
It turns out that anyone can just say anything on the internet if they're confident enough.
Pizzazz.
It's pretty clearly from daddy.
Now, what exactly is a daddy?
Well, think George Clooney, but achievable.
Love that.
But how do you get from daddy to zaddy? Today we're going to take a look at how English borrowed a word from, well, itself. We're going to talk about ash tensing, assimilation, and auditory biases, but don't worry if those words mean nothing to you now. We'll see how we get from those A's to Z's like Zam and Zaddy. So do me a favor, like and subscribe and ring the bell for notifications. And to all my new subscribers from last week, welcome and thank you. I'm Dr. Taylor Jones and this is Language Zaddy. I'm Dr. Taylor Jones and this is Language Jones. Okay, so there's a lot of different ideas about the origin of zaddy. I'm going to share with you my hypothesis. This is based on my training in sociolinguistics, specifically sociophonetics, and my knowledge of how borrowing and contact work. I'm not going to be able to prove this, but I think it's got a much better chance of being correct than any of the other explanations I've seen. I've been pretty vocal in saying that 9 times out of 10, new mainstream slang in the US is just taken from AAE and shoehorned into other accents, but I actually don't think that's what happened here. Bear with me, but I think this was Spanish English filtered through AAE and then onto the mainstream. Hear me out. Different accents have different ways of pronouncing a vowel that linguists usually call ash because it's the vowel in the word ash. It's pronounced ah on its own, but different accents do different things. So, for instance, in many North American accents, there's what's called ash tensing. The basic idea is that ah is produced with the body of the tongue low in the mouth and more front than, say, ah. In the most common version, ash is tensed before nasals, meaning sounds where air flows out of your nose. Those are your N's, your M's, and your Ng's, as in sing. What tensing means is that you actually raise your tongue, so in other words you might say ah, but in words where that sound is followed by a nasal, you might actually say something closer to yeah. Different accents follow different patterns, so New York City English has a complicated system of ash tensing depending on what sound follows ah, and Philadelphia has a complicated but different system. Okay, so hold on to this. The second part is about where your tongue is in your mouth when you say the t and d sounds, T and D sounds. Many native English speakers from the US and Canada touch the tip of the tongue to the roof of the mouth. However, Romance language speakers have dental D's and T's, meaning the tip of the tongue touches behind the teeth. That's part 2. Hold on to that. The third part is what's called assimilation. That just means starting to make hissy sounds where you didn't before. Hissification, if you will. You here could mean a language, not an individual, by the way. One common pathway for this is where T and D precede high vocoids, which is technical jargon for vowel-like sounds that are produced with your tongue high in your mouth. That's your E's, your A's, your Oo's, and in languages that have it, your U's and U's and so on. We say vocoids instead of vowels so we can capture that old sometimes Y. The Y in yes is basically the same sound as the E in keep, but in one word it's a consonant, yes, and another it's a vowel, keep. So ash tensing means that words with an ah sound might have an ia sound, and that first E or I in ia is a high vocoid. So if those immediately follow a T or a D, you're more likely to have assimilation, and especially if you make those T's and D's by your teeth instead of your hard palate. That alone will give you Zam, Daniel, and of course, Zaddy. This is cross-linguistically common, so if you speak Portuguese, or even if you just like Bossa Nova, you'll be familiar with words like desafinado, saudade, or Gingi. If you know Canadian French, you'll know that tu is pronounced tu, and COVID-19 is the very buzzy COVID-19. I hear this stuff in English in New York all the time. My first thoughts were of Salt and Pepper
Chocolate chip honey dip.
and John Leguizamo.
When I caught wind and I did, Sleeping Beauty awoke.
Actually, my first thoughts were of the women in Dominican neighborhoods who would call me psst, papi, it's Zaddy. But I don't have video of that, and street harassers don't usually want to repeat for a recording no matter how many times you tell them it's totally for linguistics and it'll be on your YouTube channel. YouTube channel. They do this in the UK too, like a variation of it when they ride the tube, but that's a slightly different process. Anyway, when I went to find examples, I noticed that it happened more with T's than with D's, and it turns out there's only like 3 articles and 1 dissertation on this, and a big finding is that if you do this to D's, you definitely do this to T's. The T's have to come first. Notice also that it happens before aw in words like talking, but in New York, aw is pronounced uah, and that oo at the beginning is a high vocoid. I'm not saying Zaddy is a New York City phenomenon. In fact, I think it happened a lot in a bunch of different places, including LA.
Damn, Daniel.
And Miami. It's not just Boricuas,
Puerto Rico!
but also Dominicanos, Cubanos, and other Caribbean Spanish influenced bilingual English speakers. And it's not even limited to Spanish influence, but can be related to assimilation in other accents, or even for social affect. Listen to how young baby Tate says damn and Danny, and listen to her vowel in man as well. And it can happen with all high vocoids, which is how you get
Humpty Dumpty.
it's pronounced with the zumpty.
Pronounced with the umpty.
So John Leguizamo was saying zam in the 90s. Big deal. When you look for the origin of Zaddy, what you find is that use skyrocketed in 2016 after a song by Ty Dolla $ign. And this is the cool part. This is where dialect contact and auditory biases come into play. Without extensive training and practice, we don't hear speech sounds the way they're actually made. Our perception is all or nothing. So the difference between a D and a T are voice onset time, or when your vocal cords vibrate relative to when you make that gesture with your tongue. In principle, you could create infinite gradations in voice onset time, but in practice we hear everything on one side of the split as D and everything on the other as T. I think it's like 30 milliseconds for D and 50 for T, and we just kind of avoid that gray area and the 40 millisecond area. Same goes for vowel perception. I can make all the vowels smoothly, but when you play people a sound, it gets sorted into a bucket. It's either E or I. The smallest difference we can hear is about 17 hertz. 16 hertz difference, same vowel. So what happens when someone has an accent that does a thing that results in a sequence of sounds that your accent doesn't really even allow you to hear? You fit it into what you can hear. This is basically all of why people have accents in foreign languages. We're just making the closest sound in our mental organization system. And who's Ty Dolla $ign talking about? Well, what do we know about her? Not strictly relevant for our purposes, but adds color. This is where Ty is from and why he pronounces his ash the way he does. There's some great research on this from Dr. Charisse King. Check her out. I mean, you do you. Ding, 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 ding. He's adding flavor, talking about his vaguely exotic girlfriend. We're just not going to talk about that part. And literally describing her accent. Now, yes, this song became a hit, and then it entered the mainstream. So yeah, white people got it from AAE speakers, but the origins are almost certainly unconscious reanalysis of assimilation, which is why it keeps happening. It's like a massive game of telephone, but with really noticeable words from very cool people. Ty Dolla $ign's romantic interest in the heat of passion calls him Zaddy. He lays down a track where he sounds cool as f***, talking about she call me Zaddy, and everyone just immediately accounts for his California accent and adopts the word Zaddy, then subjecting it to their own accents. We've gone from daddy to Zaddy to Zaddy to Zaddy, which has now been borrowed as a separate word from daddy. Zaddy has the added bonus of disambiguating between daddy, which could be just a father, and, you know, a sexy daddy of unspecified paternal status. So no, it's not phonoaesthetics because Z's just sound jazzy.
Jazz, pizzazz,
Zazzy.
whiz.
What do you think? Leave me a comment below and let me know who you think is a Zaddy and why it's Jeff Goldblum. If you like what I'm doing with the channel, please like and subscribe and ring the bell for notifications. For those of you who requested a video on faking YouTube polyglottery, don't worry. It's in the works, and I'll link here, and in the Linguifile video where I first mentioned it. I have merchandise available. I don't know where it's going to show up. I think it's pretty sweet. and I have a link to it in the description. Till next time.
Zaddy gon' pull up and he gon' fuck you all night. Ay, you know Zaddy, they got that right. Ay, she got Zaddy running up a bucket on her. Ay, she got Zaddy running up a bucket on her. She keep on calling me Zaddy. She keep on calling me Zaddy. She keep on calling me Zaddy. Tell her baby gotta fight.